For a record 6 years now, Squarespace has been helping me turn my dream into reality, and that's what Squarespace does for millions of other people too. Their industry-leading website creation tools help millions of people start new careers, build new businesses, or just get things done. They're offering a special discount to viewers of this channel, so stick around to the end of the video to learn more.
Hyper Light Breaker. I'm not gonna lie, this one's kind of a bummer. This released last week into early access and is the latest game from Heart Machine, the studio best known for their first game, Hyper Light Drifter. That was a cool Kickstarter project developed entirely in Game Maker that's really established itself as sort of a cult classic now. It took the indie game scene by storm at the time with its rich world building that blended dark fantasy with neon-soaked sci-fi, accompanied by a beautiful synth soundtrack, drop-dead gorgeous pixel art, and slick 2D animation work that still holds up today. Such artistry and vision on display with that game. They were able to deliver that a second time with Solar Ash, an equally stunning Shadow of the Colossus meets ice skating action adventure game that released to critical acclaim a couple of years ago. So when Heart Machine revealed that after all these years, we'd finally be getting another game in that hyper light world, I was pretty chuffed. It seemed like they still had that Midas touch, and I thought by returning to the IP that put them on the map, surely they were about to go 3 for 3 with Hyper Light Breaker. Well, after over 12 hours of gameplay, having fought all the bosses and unlocked all the things, it pains me to say it, but I think they've missed the mark here. I'll say again that this is an early access title, and I went in knowing that it'd be a work in progress on all fronts. And yeah, as expected, it's in a rough technical state, it's very light on content, many of its systems are unrefined and poorly explained, but I think most disappointing for me was that all the things that Heart Machine have gotten so right in the past just aren't present here. Hyper Light Breaker is so far completely devoid of narrative in both its characters and environments. Visually, it's kind of garish and confused. Crucially though, the core gameplay lacks the fluidity of their previous titles, and the difficulty is so out of whack for a laundry list of reasons, to the point that it's borderline unplayable in the early stages of the game if you're playing solo. It's a real shame because the promise of a co-op roguelite set in the Hyper Light Drifter world, that's a recipe for something pretty special. Like, I should have been really pumped to see where this would go, but yeah, even after all those early access issues are ironed out, Hyper Light Breaker's greatest weakness, one that is unlikely to be fixed with time, is that it lacks that strong, cohesive vision that put Heart Machine on the map. Hyper Light Breaker describes itself as an open-world action roguelite with 3-player co-op. What that means is that rather than your typical roguelite runs being a chain of separate rooms, it's instead all presented on this one procedurally generated open-world map, where you can decide for yourself which items to go for, as indicated on your map, along the way collecting these prisms to unlock each boss, which you can then take down in order. Added to that roguelite loop is a sort of extraction mechanic, allowing you to return to the main hub area to purchase items and upgrades with your currencies. You can continue to extract and return to the run as much as you like, but you only have 4 lives, and if you run out, you'll need to reset the whole world and start over. There's been a few games recently that have done a similar thing, like Ravenbound, and most recently Witchfire. Side note, it's cool to see Witchfire doing well for itself despite a rough initial launch. Personally though, as with my review of Witchfire, I'm not yet sold on the concept of an open world roguelite, and Hyper Light Breaker has done little to change that. I do want to first call out that procedural generation though. While the biomes on this map don't feel meaningfully different, each of them the same sort of landscape, just with different colors, there is a surprising amount of verticality, shorelines, banks, and ramps. At no point did I get stuck or had something spawn in some place that was impossible to reach, and cruising around all this with the help of a hoverboard and glider, it's all quite enjoyable. From what I understand, it's pretty difficult to create 3D procedurally generated open worlds that are actually interesting to traverse, but I think Heart Machine have done a pretty good job in this regard. The thing is, I don't think the roguelite genre gains much by being an open world. There's no real sense of discovery or exploration. You'll see many of the same structures haphazardly scattered around. There is nothing of interest between between these areas, aside from a bit of currency. When you open the map, basically everything worth collecting is laid out before you. There are no side quests or secret items or unexpected pickups, and so it devolves into that usual checklist-style open-world thing, just on a smaller scale. It's all in the name of giving you more freedom versus the usual roguelite formula, but the reality is that picking your next enemy camp is really no different to picking the next room in Hades or Cult of the Lamb or whatever. But now there's just a bunch of unnecessary downtime in between. And then there's the fact that the open world looter style element is kind of at odds with the roguelite element. Like a roguelite, everything you collect is temporary. They can be lost on death. Only the Heart Machine have gone for this strange middle ground where each item has a sort of durability bar and each death will cause them to lose durability, with higher rarity items able to withstand 1 or 2 more deaths. Throughout your run, you're also able to stash unneeded pickups to swap out at the hub or to save for future runs. So yeah, it's sort of like a looter in that way, where the goal is to essentially hoard enough gear that you then no longer need to rely on the roguelite style RNG to form your build. I get the intention, but I think it goes against the joy of the roguelite loop. For me, roguelites are about working with what you've got. Sure, if you've got a certain build in mind, you might be able to lean towards it, but the exciting part is that you never know how your build will actually turn out. With these looter/extraction elements, Hyperlight Breaker doesn't promote that same level of experimentation. You'll settle on a melee and ranged weapon that you like, you'll slap on your favorite special ability, some armor, and then you'll head out into your run to play the same way that you're comfortable with. The only thing that's left to chance then are these passive perks, as they cannot be stashed in the open world, but they can be stashed if you bought them from vendors. It's all very weird, but at this point, it's less about experimenting with synergies and more just about finding stuff that fits into your build at all, because drops do not adapt to your loadout. So if you've started your run with a pretty high rarity shotgun that has the perks you like, then you're just gonna ignore the many pickups related to other guns. And the upgrades themselves, they're kind of bland. They're generic stat boosts, like a flat 30% extra damage on a certain weapon type, and then even more damage after a dodge or kill. There are no items that enable new synergies or play off one another, which means you also can't really play around with cool procs or status effects. Like, I'll find a gun that applies more damage to burning enemies, but the only way I could find to actually apply burning was to be lucky enough that I got a melee weapon drop with that functionality. Compare that to the best in the genre, like Risk of Rain or Hades, where almost no upgrade is wasted. They all contribute and build off one another, constantly opening up pathways that you didn't expect. That's where that replayability comes from. Further, the longer you hang around on a single run, the more dangerous it gets. Waves of enemies will constantly spawn in on you, mini-bosses will hunt you down, these fiery zones will appear throughout the map, and there is nothing you can do about any of this except to extract and then re-enter the run. It wants you to go in, run around to collect some stuff, then extract, then go back in to kill a boss, extract, go back in to fight the next boss, extract. I just find this loop kind of awkward in the context of a roguelite, where each run is typically this single, steady climb in difficulty and power. Here, the difficulty curve is way out of whack. Once you've accrued enough stuff, runs actually then become trivial, because once you've got that perfect loadout and you're no longer dying, you'll never have to let go of those items and you'll have no reason to experiment. Getting to that point though is a real exercise in patience, because where Heart Machine's previous games were these tight, focused experiences with fluid gameplay, Hyperlight Breaker is actually very frustrating to play on account of the combat, which is just, yeah, it's kind of rough. Like Hyperlight Drifter, Hyperlight Breaker is intended to be a difficult game, but more often than not, that difficulty is a result of annoying problems and unintuitive systems, rather than clever design. To the point that the early game is borderline unplayable solo because you don't have the gear to help suppress those problems. Firstly, on the player's end, almost every action in this game has a very heavy animation lock attached to it, which makes combat feel quite stilted. You've got so many combat tools, but many of them feel way too risky to use. Like almost every time I had an opening to use my melee weapon's heavy attack, I get like half of my health wiped away in the exchange. Likewise, you can parry, but it feels so not worth using because the timing on it is very tight, but it also only blocks directly in front of you, and with the amount of enemies that you're often dealing with, you are way better off dashing instead. It's like the game wants you to play it like a slick, fast-paced action game, weaving all these tools together, but instead, you're forced to play sheepishly, dashing in and out with singular attacks. Another big reason for that are the enemies. They are ridiculously overtuned. They move very fast into melee range, they're super aggressive, and the game has no way of managing aggro, so they will just attack one after the other with no time in between. Their attacks often involve some kind of leap that is poorly telegraphed, and when you do get hit, they do copious amounts of damage. I'm talking like a basic mob able to chunk down like 20% of your health in a single attack. On top of all that, taking damage will stagger you, so many times I just get hit over and over with nothing I could do about it. As you can imagine, this all continues to be a problem during boss fights, especially so because as if they weren't challenging enough, you've also got endless waves of extra mobs spawning throughout the fight. I get that they're sort of necessary for ammo drops and to activate those on-kill perks, but having them spawn constantly made these fights so much more frustrating than they needed to be because of all those problems that I've already mentioned. It's clearly designed as a co-op game first, and yeah, I mean it does work better that way because the aggro is spread more evenly and you can actually land these big attacks when the enemy turns away. However, I found it difficult to find any co-op lobbies even during peak periods, and the random matchmaker never seemed to work either. Could only play with a friend who owned the game. So just be warned that right now, if you want to play co-op but can't rope in a friend, you might find it difficult to do so. Even so, playing co-op does not magically fix all these other problems I mentioned. In fact, I found myself having to deal with other issues on top of it all, like extra visual noise and janky AI behavior. The game's difficulty is compounded by just some strange systems and design decisions, many of which are poorly tutorialized, if at all. For example, many times I'd rock up to a prism or a loot cache and find out that they're locked behind a barrier. No indication of this on the map, by the way. So I'd then be on the hunt for keys to open up these barriers. So where do you get keys? I'd later find out that you can buy keys from vendors out in the world, but bizarrely, a lot of these vendors require a key to access in the first place. At that point, I'm completely blocked off and have to just bum around until I stumble upon a key by chance. Another example, you start out with 0 health packs, and for the longest time, I'm talking like half a day, I could not figure out how to get more, which was a real problem given how brutally difficult the early game is. There was this unlock for health pack capacity in this persistent upgrade tree back at the hub, but I was ignoring it because I figured that I wouldn't need extra capacity if I couldn't find a single one in the first place. Come to find out, just on a whim, you do need this upgrade to even start getting health packs. All this is to say that right now, Hyper Light Breaker's game loop is needlessly challenging and unintuitive. It's indicative of my broader point, which is that it sorely lacks the strong vision that Heart Machine's previous games had. Setting aside the gameplay, the surrounding elements of Hyper Light Breaker, like narrative, music, art, they don't hold a candle to what has come before. I think to best illustrate that point, here's some of the opening cutscene to Hyper Light Drifter. The vibes here are immaculate. Notice the unnerving synth, the artistry of its presentation, how effectively it sets the tone and establishes this world and this story without words. A story of pain, of isolation, of mystery. You're left with many questions about this world and yearn to find those answers. Here in Hyper Light Breaker, you just don't have that same vibe. There are no cutscenes, there's no dialogue, despite there being a handful of characters standing around the hub. There is is nothing to establish who you are, where you are, what you're working toward. The environmental storytelling is so light and disparate that you can't make much sense of it. The music isn't bad, it has sort of a similar vibe to Hyperlight Drifter, but with no key moments with which to utilize it, it fades into nothing more than background noise. And then perhaps most striking about Hyperlight Drifter was the art direction. The gorgeous pixel art, chock full of vibrant color work and evocative imagery. It stands to reason that translating this world into 3D would be difficult, but I think Heart Machine already overcame that hurdle with Solar Ash. While not in the same world, it still showcased Heart Machine's brilliant artistic eye, so I was confident that whatever they made next would follow suit. Yet somehow, it didn't. While Hyperlight Breaker's visuals do share some familiar elements like the bold colors and neon fantasy aesthetic, it feels like a noticeable step back for this studio in all regards. Low-res textures and multiple layers of post-processing make the whole world look blurry and disorienting. I mean, compare this to Solar Ash, which is clean, it's sharp, every frame a wallpaper. More to the point, there's so many influences thrown into the mix here. It's fantasy, it's sci-fi, it's otherworldly, but all of this alongside modern military equipment, the hub area looking like cyberpunk Japan, the characters all cyborgs crossed with animals, it's visually noisy and incohesive, lacking the same sense of artistic direction previously seen from this studio. And to this point, I haven't even mentioned all the other problems that usually come with an early access launch, like its rough technical state. I'm playing on a top-of-the-line PC, and the game would regularly chug down to as low as 30 FPS alongside major stutters. It's also very light on content at the moment, just 2 bosses in the game, despite what the game would lead you to believe. Like on the map, it'll show these portraits of some different boss, but surprise, it's actually the same wolf boss yet again, with no changes in moveset. But I don't feel I need to dig too much into that stuff. I mean, these things are somewhat expected in an early access game, and to be honest, they're the least of my concerns with Hyperlight Breaker. Heart Machine have already put out a patch to help with performance, and have said that they're looking to address things like difficulty, and that's excellent. It's great to see them already taking feedback to heart. I honestly wish them the best, and I'm curious to see what this might evolve into. But I think part of the job of an early access title is to leave a good first impression and to showcase some strong foundations. And from what I've played, Hyperlight Breaker just isn't doing that for me. It's missing that source, that magic that has carried Heart Machine this far. And in that sense, I find myself far more interested in their next game, Possessors, which from what little we've seen, does have that focus and that flair that Hyperlight Breaker is missing. It's got some novel ideas, and if the studio continues to act on feedback like they already have, if they manage to re-inject some of that magic, this does have every chance to be a decent co-op roguelite, I think. But at the moment, Hyperlight Breaker is rather frustrating, messy, and perhaps even uninspired, which is not something I thought I'd say about the Heart Machine game.
Happy New Year! It's 2025 and it's the perfect excuse to kick off something new. A new hobby, a new project, a new business, and whatever it is you're doing, chances are a website will help, and there's no better or easier way to build a website than with this video's sponsor, Squarespace. The days of having to hire an expensive team of web developers to make your website are over. With Squarespace, you can build a professional looking website in minutes. Just start by selecting one of their templates, customize it using their intuitive tools, and then begin uploading your content, be it published articles, the inventory of stuff you're selling, your art portfolio, whatever. Squarespace websites all support e-commerce, making it easy to begin doing business on your site, either by selling product or by organizing appointments if you're providing a service. They support multiple payment solutions as well as detailed analytics so you can see how your customers are finding you and what they're doing when they spend time on your site. Recently, Squarespace just took things to a whole new level. Their all-new design intelligence framework leverages their 2 decades of experience in website creation to give you even more tools to shape the website of your dreams, helping with things like copywriting, tone of voice, product descriptions, and even mailouts. So whatever new thing you want to kick off in 2025, chances are that Squarespace can help. And if you don't believe me, you can check it out for free by visiting squarespace.com. And when you want to get serious, visit squarespace.com/skillup to get 10% off your purchase of a website or a domain name. A big thanks to Squarespace for their 6 years of supporting this channel, and a big thanks to you for watching the video.